I told my daughter I lost my job. She kicked me out, but she didn't know. I had just received few $1,000,000. Before we begin today's story, if you believe in family, dignity, and the quiet strength that lives in a mother's heart, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support allows us to continue sharing these important stories. 30 years is a long time to hold your breath. For 3 decades, I had measured my life not in seasons or milestones, but in the deafening, rhythmic roar of the industrial looms at the Georgia Tech's textile factory. That sound was the first thing I heard when I woke in the pre-dawn dark, and the last thing echoing in my ears when I fell into an exhausted sleep. It was the metronome of my sacrifice. The air inside those brick walls was a character in itself, thick with the snow-like lint of cotton that caught in the back of your throat, and the sharp metallic tang of machine oil that clung to your clothes and skin, a perfume of unending labor. My hands, which in another life, a life I sometimes visited in dreams, were meant to hold delicate sable brushes, to feel the satisfying pull of thick oil paint on a fresh canvas, were instead calloused and stained with grease. They were experts at unjamming shuttles and rethreading spindles, their movements economical and sure after a lifetime of repetition. Inside of me, locked away in a dusty, silent room in my soul, lived an artist. I could still remember her. She was a young woman who saw the world in gradients of light and shadow, who found magic in the way the Atlanta sun turned the Chattahoochee River to molten gold at dusk. Her small attic apartment before Brenda had smelled of turpentine and linseed oil, a scent that to me was holier than any incense. I remembered the visceral joy of mixing the perfect shade of ultramarine blue, the thrill of capturing the fragile translucence of a flower petal with a single confident brushstroke. There was one painting, a portrait of my mother sitting by a window, her face a beautiful landscape of wrinkles and wisdom that I never finished. I had to sell my art supplies to pay for a down payment on a better apartment when Brenda started school. The half-finished canvas was wrapped in an old sheet at the back of my closet, a ghost of the woman I was meant to be. I had willingly, lovingly placed that version of myself on a sacrificial altar. I did it for Brenda. I can still feel the exact moment my life split into a before and after. It was in the sterile, beige-walled office of the Atlanta Children's Home. She was 2 years old, a tiny thing with enormous haunted eyes, clutching a threadbare stuffed rabbit. She had been passed from one foster home to another after her biological parents had relinquished their rights, and the fear in her gaze was a tangible thing. But when the social worker placed her in my lap, she looked up at me and her tiny hand reached out and curled around my index finger, holding on with a desperate strength. In that instant, a fierce, primal love ignited in my chest, so powerful it burned away every other consideration. She was mine. My husband, Richard, did not feel the same fire. His love was more conditional, more logical. "She's not our blood, Eleanor," he'd argued that night, his voice devoid of the emotion that was thrumming through me. "We can have our own. Why would you take on someone else's child, someone else's problems?" I looked at the man I had loved for 5 years and saw a stranger. "She's not a problem, Richard," I had told him, my voice dangerously quiet. "She is my heart." We were divorced within the year. He took half of our meager savings, and I took the little girl with the haunted eyes, vowing to give her a world so full of love and security that she would never feel the chill of abandonment again. And I gave her everything. I worked the day shift at the factory, then spent my evenings and weekends cleaning corporate offices, the smell of industrial bleach replacing the scent of turpentine. That extra money paid for the best dance lessons, for the frilly tutus and shiny tap shoes. I sold my mother's wedding ring, the last piece of her I owned, to buy Brenda her first car for her 16th birthday, a dependable, if unglamorous, sedan. I still remember the flicker of disappointment in her eyes that it wasn't the cute little convertible her friends were driving. It was a tiny cut, one of many I would endure over the years. When she met Marcus in college, a young man from a family whose wealth was as old and established as the city of Atlanta itself, I saw the chasm between our worlds widen. She started to introduce me as my mother, Eleanor, never mentioning where I worked, her voice glossing over my existence, as if I were a slightly embarrassing footnote in the grand story of her life. Then came the wedding, a fairy tale of white lace and champagne fountains, a spectacle designed to impress her new, wealthy family. To help pay for it, I cashed in the retirement fund I had so painstakingly built over 20 years. And to give her the ultimate wedding gift, the one that would secure her position in that new world, I sold my small, beloved house, the only home I'd ever known, the one my father had built, and gave them every last cent for the down payment on their sprawling mansion. Brenda and Marcus had wept, clinging to me, promising they would take care of me forever, that I would always have a place with them. I believed them. I moved into a tiny one-room apartment across town, my world shrinking so that hers could expand. Today, the foundation of that world disintegrated. The announcement of the factory closing was delivered with brutal corporate efficiency. A grim-faced man in a suit read from a script talking about global markets and restructuring, words that meant nothing to the hundreds of us who had poured our lives into the machines that now stood silent around us. 30 years of loyalty, and all I had to show for it was a final paycheck and a small severance that wouldn't last 3 months. My hands were shaking as I dialed Brenda's number, my heart pounding with a familiar, anxious beat. I needed to hear her voice. I needed her to tell me everything would be okay. "Honey, it's me," I said when she finally answered. "Something's happened. We need to talk. The factory, they're closing it down. I've lost my job." A dead cold silence stretched across the line. It was a silence so profound I thought the call had dropped. I was expecting a gasp of concern, a flurry of questions. Instead, I heard a long, irritated sigh. "You have got to be kidding me." Brenda's voice was sharp, brittle, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Today, of all days? Mom, this is a disaster. Marcus is having his big promotion party next month. What am I supposed to tell people, that my mother is unemployed? Do you have any idea how that will make me look?" The word struck me with the force of a physical blow. There was no, "Are you okay, Mom?" No, "Don't worry, we'll figure something out." There was only her reputation, her party. The love I had nurtured for 3 decades felt like a fragile, hollow thing in the face of her breathtaking selfishness. In that one cold, heartless moment, standing alone in my tiny apartment with the ghost of my mother's painting in the closet, I understood that it wasn't just my job I had lost. I had lost my daughter too. Or perhaps the truth was even more terrible. I had never really had her at all. The silence in my small apartment after the call was a living entity. It pressed in on me, amplifying the hum of the old refrigerator and the frantic thumping of my own heart. Brenda's words echoed in the emptiness, each one a shard of ice embedding itself in my soul. What am I supposed to tell people? How will this make me look? It was a selfish, childish reaction, I told myself. A momentary panic. She couldn't have meant it. Not my Brenda, not the little girl whose scraped knees I had kissed, whose nightmares I had soothed, whose future I had built with the marrow of my own bones. The thought was unbearable. This was a wound that could not be treated over the phone. I needed to see her face, to look into her eyes and find the daughter I knew was still there, beneath the polished veneer of Marcus's world. I grabbed my purse and my keys, my movement stiff and automatic. The drive to her neighborhood was a journey across a social and emotional continent. I left behind the cracked pavement and modest, aging brick buildings of my part of town and crossed into the pristine, manicured world of North Atlanta. Here, the lawns were impossibly green, tended by landscaping crews, and the houses were not homes but towering statements of wealth, each one a monument to a life I could barely comprehend. As I turned onto her street, a familiar sickness churned in my stomach. It was the feeling of being an imposter, a visitor from another, lesser world. It was a feeling I had grown accustomed to, a toll I paid every time I came to see my own child. I pulled up to the curb in front of the magnificent Georgian-style mansion. My house, the house my parents' legacy had bought. It was beautiful, with its stately white columns and perfectly symmetrical windows, but it always felt cold, unwelcoming. It was a house designed for entertaining, not for living. I walked up the long slate pathway, my sensible work shoes sounding clumsy and loud, and rang the bell. Brenda opened the door. She was dressed in an elegant cream-colored cashmere lounge set, her hair pulled back in a flawless knot. She looked every bit the lady of the manor. Her face, however, was a mask of pure annoyance. There was no trace of welcome, only the weary impatience of someone whose busy schedule had been interrupted. "Mom, what are you doing here?" she asked, not stepping aside to let me in. "I told you I'm in the middle of planning for the party. The caterers are calling me back any minute." "I had to see you, honey," I said, my voice pleading. "What you said on the phone, you didn't mean that, did you? This isn't about the party. This is my life, Brenda. 30 years of my life. It's gone." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she said, finally stepping back with an exasperated sigh. "Of course it's about the party. Everything is connected. You just don't understand how this world works." As I stepped into the cavernous, marble-floored foyer, Marcus appeared from the living room, a crystal tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. He was handsome, smooth, and possessed the easy, unshakable confidence of a man who had never known a day of hardship. He placed a condescending peck on my cheek. "Eleanor," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "A surprise visit. Brenda told me about your situation at the factory. A tough break." "It's more than a tough break, Marcus," I said, looking from his impassive face to my daughter's. "It's everything." "Well, we can't look at it that way," he said, taking a sip of his drink. "We have to be strategic. Brenda's right to be concerned. My promotion party is a major event. The CEO of my company will be there. Perceptions matter. The optics of my mother-in-law suddenly being unemployed. It's not ideal. We just need to manage the narrative." He said it all so calmly, as if my life's work collapsing was a minor public relations issue to be spun. Before I could respond, a third voice, sharp and imperious, cut through the air. "The narrative is that it's an embarrassment, Marcus, and you know it." Cynthia, Marcus's mother, glided into the foyer. She was a tall, slender woman who carried herself with the rigid posture of the perpetually disapproving. She was draped in silk, a string of perfect pearls at her throat, her face a carefully maintained mask of polite disdain. She had never liked me, had never missed an opportunity to remind Brenda that her son had married beneath his station. Cynthia, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Eleanor, she replied, her eyes sweeping over my simple clothes with a look of profound distaste. I heard your unfortunate news. I always knew that factory was a rather precarious place. People in our circle don't lose jobs, Eleanor. They transition between boards. They consult. They certainly don't find themselves unemployed. You must understand how this reflects on Brenda. They were a united front, the three of them, talking about me as if I were a piece of furniture that had suddenly broken and ruined the aesthetic of the room. I felt myself shrinking, my voice becoming smaller. I tried to appeal to the one thing I thought we all had in common, the future. I know the timing is bad, I said, turning to Brenda, but maybe there's a silver lining. I'll have so much free time now. When the baby comes, I can help. I can be here every day. Brenda actually rolled her eyes. The gesture was so dismissive, so utterly contemptuous, it physically hurt. And do what, Mom? She said, her voice dripping with scorn. You worked a loom for 30 years. You didn't study early childhood development. We'll need proper help. Cynthia sniffed, a sound of triumph. Of course you will. We've already made inquiries about a proper English nanny and a sleep consultant from New York. We require professionals for my grandchild, not well-meaning amateurs. The final horrifying blow came from Marcus, who set his glass down and adopted the tone of a man proposing a sensible business solution. Look, Eleanor, he said, the way I see it, you're only 62. You're in good health. All this talk of retirement is absurdly premature. There's no reason you can't find other work. In fact, it's essential. My heart stopped. The blood turned to ice in my veins as I began to understand where this was going. They didn't see me as a mother who needed help. They saw me as a faulty asset that needed to be replaced. They saw me as their problem to solve. And their solution was more horrific than anything I could have ever imagined. I stood in the cold, cavernous foyer, a lone, silent island in a churning sea of their condescension. The three of them, my daughter, her husband, her mother-in-law, looked at me with the self-satisfied air of problem solvers who had just engineered a brilliant, if slightly distasteful solution. They had demoted me from mother to liability, and now they were offering me a new position. Servant. It was Cynthia who spoke first, her voice dripping with the false magnanimity of a queen bestowing charity upon a peasant. My dear friend Elizabeth van der Sloot, the van der Sloots of the shipping fortune, you understand, was just complaining to me that she had to let her head housekeeper go. It is a live-in position, of course. The work is demanding naturally, but Elizabeth is known for being discreet with her staff's circumstances. It would be a perfect position for you, Eleanor. A roof over your head and a respectable wage. A respectable wage. The words hung in the air thick with unspoken meaning. A wage she expected me to collect and then dutifully hand over. Brenda's face lit up with a sickening, selfish relief. She saw the perfect answer to her problem, a way to hide me away while still profiting from my labor. Oh, Mother, that's a brilliant idea, she chirped, clapping her hands together. You wouldn't have to worry about paying rent on that dreary little apartment anymore. You could live on their beautiful estate, and you could just send us a portion of your salary. It would be your contribution. You wouldn't have to be a burden at all. That word, burden. It struck me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the last of the hopeful, loving mother out of me. I looked at my daughter, this beautiful stranger I had created, and for the first time I felt nothing but a cold, desolate emptiness. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it seemed to echo in the vast space. I will not be a housekeeper. Their faces fell in unison, their expressions shifting from benevolence to indignation. How dare I refuse their charity? How dare the problem refuse the solution? Don't be difficult, Eleanor, Marcus chided, his patronizing tone returning. This isn't a negotiation. If you refuse a respectable position in a private home, then you'll have to take what you can get. You could work for a service or a facility. The Golden Years Assisted Living Center near your apartment is always hiring janitorial staff. You can mop floors. It's steady work. It would at least show you're trying to contribute and not just give up. The casual cruelty of it, the suggestion that my 30 years of back-breaking factory work was giving up, was breathtaking. But the final unforgivable act came from Brenda. She pulled her sleek, expensive smartphone from her pocket, her thumb already swiping across the screen. "He's right," she said, her voice all business. "I can call their human resources department right now. I'm sure I can get you an interview. They'd probably hire you on the spot." The image of my daughter, phone in hand, eagerly trying to sentence me to a life of mopping the floors of a nursing home, finally shattered the last of my restraint. A dam of unspoken pain, 30 years in the making, burst within me. "Brenda, stop," I said, and my voice was raw, trembling with a pain so deep it scared me. "Just for 1 minute, stop." She looked up, startled by my tone. "Do you remember anything I told you about how you came to be my daughter? You were 2 years old. You were in a state-run home in a metal crib wearing a faded yellow dress. Your birth parents, they didn't want you. They gave you away like an unwanted piece of furniture." Tears were streaming down my face, now hot and unstoppable. "I took you. I chose you. I divorced a man I thought I loved because he would not choose you too. I worked until my bones ached and my spirit was weary to give you everything he said you'd never have. I sold my parents' home, the only true thing I ever owned, to buy you this palace. Every single choice, every sacrifice, every penny I ever earned has been for you. It was all so you would never, for 1 second of your life, feel the way you must have felt in that metal crib. Unwanted." This was it. My heart laid bare on the cold marble floor for her to see. I expected, prayed for, a flicker of remorse, a glimmer of the little girl I had loved. Instead, her face twisted into a mask of pure reptilian fury. "You think I owe you for that?" she screamed, her voice echoing in the foyer. "You owe me. You took me out of that system, yes, but you trapped me in your world. A world of factory grime and secondhand clothes. Do you have any idea how hard I've had to claw my way out of that to fit in with people like Marcus and his family? You didn't save me. You sabotaged me. You ruined my chances of being adopted by a family like theirs, a family with real money, with a real name. You owe me for the life you stole from me. You adopted me without my permission." That was it. The final insane accusation. The sound of my heart breaking was so loud I was surprised they couldn't hear it. There was nothing left to say. The daughter I had raised was gone, replaced by this monstrous stranger. Slowly I turned and walked to the front door, where I had left my small, worn suitcase. I bent down and picked it up. Their voices were still screaming at me, a chorus of hatred and disgust. "Where are you going to go?" Marcus yelled. "You have nothing. You don't even have $3,000 to your name," Cynthia shrieked. "You're a crazy old woman," Brenda screamed, her voice the loudest of all. "You'll rot on the street." I reached the door, my hand closing around the cold brass handle. I did not look back. I pulled the heavy door open and stepped out into the late afternoon sun. I closed it softly behind me, shutting out the sound of their rage forever. As the heavy oak door clicked shut, it was not the end of my world. It was the beginning. They believed they had cast me out into the darkness and destitution. They had no idea they had just released me into the light. They had judged me by the supposed contents of my wallet, and in doing so, they had sealed their own fate. For they had no knowledge of Mrs. Dubois, my old art teacher, who had always believed in me. They had no idea about her letter, her passing, and the inheritance she had left me just 1 month before. They had no idea that the crazy old woman they had just thrown away was now, thanks to a quiet final act of a kind woman's love, one of the wealthiest women in the state of Georgia. Standing on that immaculate, sun-drenched sidewalk, with the weight of my cheap suitcase in one hand and the silence of the closed door behind me, I expected to feel a crushing wave of despair. I expected my legs to buckle, for the world to dissolve into a blur of tears. I had just lost everything I had ever worked for, every dream I had ever held for my daughter. But the wave of grief never came. Instead, as I stood there, a strange and unfamiliar sensation began to bubble up from the depths of my soul. It was a terrifying, exhilarating, and utterly profound sense of lightness. The immense, crushing weight of Brenda's expectations, of Cynthia's disdain, of my own thankless 30-year sacrifice had been lifted. I was no longer Brenda's mother, a role that had required me to be small, apologetic, and endlessly giving. I was just Eleanor Vance, and I was free. Instead of calling for a cab, I began to walk. I walked away from the cold, imposing mansion I had paid for, but had never been welcome in. I walked past the other grand houses with their manicured lawns and silent, judgmental windows. With every step on the smooth, pristine pavement, I felt myself shedding a layer of my old life. I looked up and noticed, as if for the first time in decades, the brilliant, impossible blue of the Georgia sky, the lazy drift of cotton-white clouds. I had spent so long looking down, focusing on the next task, the next shift, the next sacrifice, that I had forgotten to see the world around me. This walk was not a walk of shame. It was a pilgrimage back to myself. My thoughts, unburdened, drifted to Mrs. Dubois, Evelyn Dubois, my high school art teacher, a vibrant, eccentric woman who wore colorful scarves and always had a smudge of cadmium yellow on her cheek. She was the first person in my life who had looked at me and seen an artist. "Eleanor, my dear," she had told me once, her sharp, intelligent eyes fixed on a charcoal sketch I had done, "never let anyone convince you that your vision is unimportant. A life without creating, without art, is a life half-lived. Don't you dare live a half-life." I had, of course. I had lived a life for someone else entirely. I remember the shock of the lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, finding me a month ago, knocking on the door of my tiny apartment. He had explained that Mrs. Dubois, whom I had not seen in over 40 years, had passed away. She had never married or had children. A shrewd and secret investor, she had turned her modest teacher's salary into a staggering fortune, and she had left it all, every last one of the $10 million, to me, her most promising and deserving student. I had sat in stunned silence, unable to process it. My first thought had been of Brenda. I had imagined the joy on her face when I told her. I'd pictured us shopping for a new, bigger house for her and Marcus, setting up a trust fund for my future grandchild. I was going to use this incredible gift to give her even more. I had kept it a secret, waiting for the right moment to share the wonderful news. The irony was a bitter pill. Brenda, in her cruelty, had given me the right moment not to share my fortune, but to claim it as my own. My long walk had led me to the heart of downtown Atlanta. I stood before the Grand Georgian Hotel, a historic landmark of old-world opulence, a place I had only ever seen in the glossy pages of magazines. And on a sudden, powerful impulse, an act of pure defiance against the woman who mopped floors and worked a loom, I walked towards the entrance. The doorman, in his crisp uniform, eyed my worn coat and single suitcase with a flicker of suspicion, but he held the heavy glass door open for me. I stepped into a different world. The lobby was a symphony of polished marble, crystal chandeliers, and the hushed, reverent tones of the very wealthy. For a moment, the old Eleanor, the one who felt she didn't belong, almost turned and fled. But then I remembered Cynthia's sneer and Brenda's casual cruelty, and I straightened my back. I walked directly to the front desk. The clerk, a young man with a slick, practiced smile, gave me a look that was polite on the surface but dismissive underneath. "Can I help you?" he asked, his eyes flicking again to my suitcase. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I would like your finest suite, the presidential, if it's available, for an indefinite period." His smile faltered. "Ma'am, the presidential suite is our premier accommodation. The rate is $3,000 per night." He said it with a hint of warning, a gentle suggestion that I had surely made a mistake. "That will be fine," I said. I reached into my purse and pulled out the sleek black debit card Mr. Abernathy had issued me from the estate's primary account. It had no credit limit. I placed it on the marble countertop. The clerk's eyes widened as he saw the name of the private, prestigious bank. His entire demeanor shifted, the condescension melting away, replaced by an almost comical level of deference. "Of course, Ms. Vance," he stammered. "Right away, Ms. Vance. Welcome to the Grand Georgian." The small, quiet victory was sweeter than I could have imagined. It wasn't about the money, it was about the respect. A currency I had not been paid in for a very long time. The suite was bigger than my entire house had been. It was a palace in the sky, with panoramic windows that offered a breathtaking view of the entire city. I walked through the rooms, touching the silk curtains, sinking my feet into the plush carpets. There was a grand piano in the living room, a marble bathroom with a tub the size of a small boat, and a bed that looked like a fluffy white cloud. I drew a bath, pouring in fragrant oils, and soaked until the water grew cool, washing away not just the grime of the day, but the accumulated residue of 30 years of servitude. I wrapped myself in a luxurious silk robe, ordered the most expensive champagne and caviar from room service, and made a phone call. It was not to a friend or family member. It was to Mr. Abernathy. "Mr. Abernathy, this is Eleanor Vance," I said when he answered. "I trust you are well." "Eleanor, I'm so glad you called. Have you had time to process everything?" "I have," I said, my voice now possessing a calm authority that felt both new and entirely natural. "Something has happened that has clarified my perspective. I am ready to move forward. I need you to begin liquidating the necessary assets and establish my primary investment and checking accounts immediately. We have a great deal of work to do." After I hung up, I walked to the massive window, a glass of champagne in my hand. I looked out over the glittering expanse of the city. Far in the distance, I could see the soft, affluent glow of Brenda's neighborhood. She had thrown me out, believing I was at the bottom, a piece of trash to be discarded. But as I stood there, wrapped in silk, looking down on the world that had been the backdrop for my long sacrifice, I understood the truth. I wasn't at the bottom. I was at the top of a brand new life, and I was just getting started. The morning after my arrival at the Grand Georgian, I woke to a sensation I hadn't felt in 30 years. Silence. Not the oppressive, lonely silence of my tiny apartment, but a deep, peaceful quiet, the kind that allows you to hear your own thoughts. I rose from the magnificent bed and walked to the panoramic window, watching the sun burn the morning mist off the Atlanta skyline. The city below was just waking up, a sprawling organism of concrete and ambition. From this vantage point, it was beautiful, orderly, and for the first time, it didn't feel intimidating. It felt like a kingdom of possibilities. My first order of business was not revenge, it was security. It was the act of putting down roots in soil that no one could ever take from me again. I spent 2 hours with Mr. Abernathy on the phone, who confirmed that the first significant transfer of funds was complete. A multi-million-dollar balance now sat in a private bank account under my name. He emailed me the necessary financial statements, official, undeniable proof of my new reality. With these documents secured in my purse, I dressed not in the worn, practical clothes of a factory worker, but in a simple, elegant navy blue dress I had purchased from one of the hotel's exclusive boutiques that morning. It was the most expensive piece of clothing I had ever owned, and it felt like armor. I decided to visit the most prestigious real estate agency in the city, Sterling Properties, the firm that handled the estates of Atlanta's old money elite. It was Cynthia's world, Brenda's aspirational world, and I was about to walk into it, not as an intruder, but as a conqueror. The office was exactly as I'd imagined, a hushed cathedral-like space with soaring ceilings, abstract art on the walls, and agents who spoke in low, modulated tones, their clothes whispering of immense wealth. As I walked in, a dozen pairs of eyes assessed me in a single cold glance, taking in my simple dress, my age, my race, and dismissing me in an instant. A woman detached herself from a group of agents and approached me, her heels clicking an imperious rhythm on the marble floor. She was young, sharp, and her dress was plastered with the designer logo I recognized from the magazines Brenda always left at my apartment. As she got closer, my breath caught. It was Tiffany, one of Brenda's closest friends from college, a woman who had been a bridesmaid at the wedding and had always looked at me with a barely concealed smirk of pity. Her eyes widened in recognition, quickly followed by a look of utter contempt. "Eleanor," she said, her voice loud enough for the entire office to hear, a deliberate act of public humiliation. "What on earth are you doing here? This isn't the temp agency. If you're looking for cleaning work, you're in the wrong building." The other agents exchanged amused, condescending smiles. I stood my ground, my heart beating a steady, calm rhythm. The old Eleanor would have flushed with shame and slunk out the door. The new Eleanor did not flinch. "Actually," Tiffany continued, warming to her performance, "if you're hungry, they put out some rather lovely complimentary pastries in the morning. Help yourself, but then you really must be going. This is a place for serious clients, Eleanor, not, well, you understand." I let her words hang in the air, allowing the full weight of her malice to settle in the silent room. I waited until every eye was on us. "I am here to purchase a property, Tiffany," I said, my voice clear and carrying. "I was hoping to see your premier listings, something in the Buckhead or Tuxedo Park area, a home, not a townhouse. Something in the 8-figure range would be a good place to start." A collective stifled gasp rippled through the office. Tiffany stared at me, her mouth agape, before letting out a sharp, ugly laugh. 8 figures? Eleanor, are you unwell? You couldn't afford the property taxes on a garden shed in Buckhead. I don't know what kind of pathetic game you're playing, but it's over. I'm going to have to ask you to leave before I call security. That won't be necessary, I said calmly. I opened my expensive new purse, took out the folder Mr. Abernathy had prepared, and placed it on the sleek glass reception desk. Here are my financial bona fides. Tiffany glanced at the papers and scoffed. Oh, please. Where did you get these, Kinkos? This is the most pathetic attempt at fraud I've ever seen. You should be ashamed of yourself. I had anticipated this. You're right, I said. Paper can be so easily faked. I took out my new smartphone, a device that still felt foreign in my hands. I unlocked it, opened the banking app, and tilted the screen so she and the now gathered crowd of agents could see it clearly. The screen glowed with my name, Eleanor Vance, and a single beautiful number under the words, checking account balance. 10,218.32. The silence in the room was absolute. The color drained from Tiffany's face, leaving her perfectly applied makeup looking like a grotesque mask on a bloodless canvas. Her jaw worked, but no sound came out. The shock in her eyes quickly morphed into something else, something venomous and ugly, as her small mind tried to process the impossible. Where did you get that money? She finally hissed, her voice a low, poisonous whisper. Which one of your dead husband's rich old friends did you have to service for that? Brenda told me you were desperate after you lost your factory job, but I had no idea. Her words were a public declaration of slander, and they were her undoing. I did not react to her vile accusation. I simply turned away from her, my dismissal of her more powerful than any retort. My eyes scanned the group of agents and landed on a young woman at the back, an intern by the look of her, who had been watching the scene unfold not with amusement, but with a look of genuine horror and embarrassment. She had been the only one to offer me a kind, hesitant smile when I had first walked in. You there, I said, my voice ringing with a newfound authority. What is your name? The young woman started. Jessica, ma'am, she stammered. Well, Jessica, I said, a warm smile spreading across my face. It appears you are about to make the largest commission of your life. I would like to purchase 2 properties today, the Astor Estate on West Paces Ferry Road and the penthouse at the Residences. Please draw up the offers. I will be paying in cash. There will be no contingencies. I then turned my gaze to the office manager, a flustered-looking man who had been scrambling towards us. And I will require your employee, Tiffany, to be terminated immediately for professional misconduct and slander. If she is still employed here by the time I sign these documents, my next call will be to my lawyer to discuss a multi-million-dollar defamation lawsuit against both her and against Sterling Properties. The manager's face went pale with terror. He looked at me, at my phone which still glowed with its impossible number, and then at Tiffany. The decision was not a difficult one. As Tiffany was being escorted out of the building, sputtering curses and threats, the news of my new fortune began its inevitable, lightning-fast journey through the gossip networks of Atlanta. I knew it would reach Brenda by nightfall. I had not laid a hand on them, but I had just launched the first devastating missile in a war they had started. I had taken their most cherished value, money, and turned it into a weapon against them. And the beautiful part was, my work here was not yet done. The aftermath in the real estate office was a spectacle of silent, panicked efficiency. The moment the security guard had firmly escorted the sputtering, venomous Tiffany from the premises, the office manager, a man named Mr. Davies, seemed to transform. His earlier condescension was replaced by a level of obsequious fawning that was almost comical. He rushed forward, offering me his personal office, apologizing profusely for his employees' unforgivable behavior, and asking if I needed anything at all. A coffee, a water, perhaps a glass of champagne to celebrate my acquisitions. I politely declined, preferring to conduct my business in the open at the glass reception desk where I'd been so publicly dismissed just minutes before. All my attention was focused on Jessica, the young intern. The girl was pale with shock, her hands trembling as she tried to navigate the complex paperwork for a $12 million cash transaction. She kept apologizing for her nervousness. "It's all right, Jessica," I said, my voice gentle. "Take your time. We'll go through it together." For the next hour, I sat with her, patiently guiding her through the forms, pointing out where signatures were needed, explaining the clauses she didn't understand. I saw in her a flicker of my younger self, eager, a little intimidated by the world, but honest and hardworking. When the final papers were signed, I made a point of speaking to Mr. Davies in a voice loud enough for the entire office to hear. "And please ensure," I said, looking directly at Jessica, "that this young woman receives the full standard commission for both sales, unaltered. Her professionalism has been exemplary." Jessica's eyes filled with tears as she did a quick calculation in her head. I had just handed a life-changing sum of money to the only person in that entire building who had shown me a shred of basic human decency. As I walked out of Sterling Properties, leaving a wake of stunned silence and frantic gossip behind me, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. It was not the cruel pleasure of revenge, but the clean, powerful feeling of justice being served. I returned to the sanctuary of my hotel suite, the adrenaline from the confrontation slowly fading, leaving a calm, focused purpose in its wake. The rest of the day was a whirlwind of activity, a masterclass in the power of my new resources. I spent hours on a conference call with Mr. Abernathy and a team of top financial advisors he had assembled at a moment's notice. I listened intently, absorbing information about trusts, investment portfolios, and philanthropic endowments. The old Eleanor, who had balanced a simple checkbook once a month, was gone. In her place was a woman who was now discussing the financial intricacies of a multi-million-dollar estate with a clarity and focus that surprised even myself. I was not a lottery winner on a spending spree. I was a CEO, and the business was my own life. I gave them a specific directive. I wanted a full workup on the financial holdings of Cynthia's family restaurant empire and the investment firm where Marcus was a rising star. It was time to map out my enemy's territory. As evening fell, I allowed myself to imagine the moment the news would reach Brenda. I could almost hear Tiffany's hysterical, shrieking voice on the other end of the phone, a toxic cocktail of rage, envy, and disbelief. "Brenda, you will not believe this. Your mother, she came in here. She has money, millions. She bought the Astor estate. She had me fired." I pictured my daughter's face. The initial, scornful disbelief, the assumption that Tiffany was lying or had lost her mind. Then, the frantic follow-up calls to the real estate agency, to mutual acquaintances, each conversation confirming the impossible truth. Finally, I pictured the dawning, sickening horror of the realization. The woman she had called a burden, the mother she had cast out as a worthless embarrassment, was a millionaire. The ATM she thought was broken and empty had revealed itself to be a fortified private bank, one whose doors were now permanently sealed to her. The ensuing argument between her and Marcus would be apocalyptic. The blame, the recriminations, the sheer panicked fury of knowing they had thrown away a fortune through their own arrogance and greed. While I imagined their world descending into chaos, my own was becoming a place of quiet, creative order. The anger that had fueled my actions at the real estate office was cooling, solidifying into a more refined long-term strategy. But it was no longer just about them. It was about me. My thoughts turned, for the first time in years, to the woman I had locked away. The artist. I spent an hour on the phone with a renowned art supply store in Paris, ordering the finest oils, pigments, and Belgian linen canvases. I had them rush deliver a set of sable brushes that cost more than my first month's rent. The next call was to a gallery owner in New York, inquiring about private lessons with a master portraitist. As I worked, a memory surfaced. A memory of being a young girl sitting at an old, out-of-tune upright piano that my father had bought at a garage sale. My fingers, small and clumsy, trying to pick out the haunting melody of a Chopin nocturne. It was another passion, another piece of myself I had packed away to make room for my life of sacrifice. I remembered Cynthia at a family dinner years ago, sneering when I mentioned I had once played. "The piano, Eleanor?" she had said, her voice dripping with condescension. "It is an instrument of refinement. It requires a certain breeding." A new idea, a new plan began to form in my mind. A plan that was as elegant and intricate as the piece of music I now longed to play again. The news of my fortune was a wildfire tearing through their carefully manicured world, and I knew they were panicking. But my fight was not just with Brenda's greed. It was with the cruel, class-obsessed snobbery of her mother-in-law. For years, Cynthia had made me feel small and worthless because I worked with my hands. I decided it was time to remind her that these hands could do more than operate a loom. They could also create beauty. And my next lesson for her would be delivered not with lawyers or bank statements, but with a grand piano and a piece by Chopin. A week passed. A week in which I imagined the shockwaves of my actions tearing through the manicured world of my daughter and her family. I pictured the frantic phone calls, the panicked meetings, the desperate attempts to understand how the meek, pliable Eleanor Vance had suddenly transformed into a formidable financial power. I knew they would be scrambling, trying to craft a narrative that painted me as an unstable, vindictive old woman who had stumbled into a fortune she didn't deserve. They would be whispering their poison into the ears of anyone in their social circle who would listen. I decided it was time to give them something real to talk about, on a stage of their own choosing. Through quiet inquiries, I learned that Cynthia and her coterie of wealthy, powerful women held court every Tuesday afternoon at Chopin & Sons, the city's most historic and exclusive piano salon. It was a place of old-world elegance, where gleaming concert grand pianos stood like magnificent sculptures on Persian rugs, and the air was thick with the scent of polished wood and old money. It was there, surrounded by her friends, that Cynthia felt most secure, most powerful. It was the perfect theater for my next lesson. I spent the week preparing. It wasn't lawyers or financial advisors I met with this time. It was a man named Dr. Alistair Finch, a retired professor from the Juilliard School, renowned as one of the finest piano instructors in the country. I had him flown to Atlanta and installed in a suite next to mine. For 7 days, we had intensive 8-hour sessions at the grand piano in my living room. I was reclaiming a piece of my soul I had abandoned half a century ago. My fingers, stiff and clumsy at first, slowly began to remember the language of the keys. The muscle memory, buried under 30 years of factory work, reawakened. Dr. Finch was a stern but brilliant teacher, and by the end of the week, he pronounced me ready. "The technique is there, Eleanor," he had said, a rare smile on his face. "But more importantly, you have something most pianists only dream of, a story to tell." On Tuesday, I dressed for my performance. I wore a simple, impeccably tailored emerald green dress of raw silk, a color that brought out the gold flecks in my eyes. At my throat was a single perfect strand of pearls. I was not the ghost of the factory, nor the vengeful woman from the real estate office. I was simply myself. When I entered Chopin and Sons, the salon fell into a hushed quiet. Every head turned. They didn't recognize me, but they recognized the aura of wealth and confidence I now carried. And then, from a plush seating area in the corner, I saw the flicker of recognition in Cynthia's eyes, quickly followed by a look of pure, unadulterated loathing. She was seated with 3 of her friends, all of them cut from the same expensive, judgmental cloth. They began whispering behind their hands, their eyes like chips of ice. Cynthia, ever the alpha, decided to face the threat head on. She rose and glided towards me, her friends trailing behind her like ladies in waiting. Her smile was a predatory slash of red lipstick. "Eleanor, dear," she said, her voice dripping with venom disguised as concern, "we've all been so terribly worried about you. This sudden windfall. People are talking. They're saying you've become rather erratic. Perhaps you should be more discreet with yourself instead of making such a public spectacle." One of her friends chimed in with a little laugh. "As they say, Cynthia, you can take the woman out of the factory." I ignored them. My eyes were fixed on the centerpiece of the showroom, a breathtaking Fazioli concert grand piano, its polished ebony surface reflecting the light from the chandeliers like a black mirror. It was one of the finest and most expensive instruments in the world. I walked towards it, my heels making a quiet, purposeful sound on the hardwood floor. A salesman hurried to my side. "May I help you, madam?" "I'm considering a purchase," I said, my voice calm. "I need to feel the action of the keys." I sat down on the plush leather bench. Cynthia and her friends stood a few feet away, smirking, fully expecting me to demonstrate my lack of culture by plinking out a clumsy, childish tune. The entire salon was watching. I took a deep, cleansing breath, closed my eyes, and let the 30 years of silence fall away. Then my hands found the keys. I did not play a simple tune. I played Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Op. 9, No. 2. The first notes, delicate and heartbreakingly beautiful, floated into the hushed air of the salon. My hands, once calloused and stiff from the factory, moved with a grace and fluidity that felt like a miracle. The music poured out of me, the voice of the artist I had suppressed for a lifetime, now unleashed in a torrent of passion and pain, of love and loss. It was the story of my life, told in a language that everyone, regardless of their station, could understand. When the final shimmering chord faded into silence, no one moved. The entire room was frozen, mesmerized. Then, from the back of the salon, a single person began to clap. Another joined in, and another, until the entire room, save for Cynthia and her horrified friends, erupted in a wave of spontaneous, heartfelt applause. I stood up, my composure absolute. I turned to the salon's director, who was now staring at me with a look of pure awe. "It is a magnificent instrument," I said clearly. "I'll take it. Please have it delivered to my new residence, the Astor Estate on West Paces Ferry." I then produced the black card. The director named the price, a staggering $180,000. It was this final act that shattered Cynthia's composure. This is impossible, she shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly in the refined space. It's a trick. You're a fraud. Where did a woman like you learn to play like that? You're nothing but a factory worker. I turned slowly to face her, the entire salon now listening to our exchange. You are right, Cynthia. For 30 years, I was a factory worker. I worked with my hands to give my daughter the life you felt she was entitled to. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. And since you're so interested in how a woman like me behaves, perhaps you and your friends would like to hear a recording of how a woman like you treats her family when she thinks no one is listening. I reached into my purse and took out my smartphone. The cruel, hateful words they had all spoken on that terrible day in Brenda's home were saved. A pristine audio file. Cynthia believed her cruelty was a private matter, protected by the walls of her son's mansion. She was about to learn that there are no walls high enough to hide from the truth, especially when it's played at full volume in the middle of your favorite salon. Cynthia's face, a moment before a mask of smug superiority, crumbled into a canvas of pure, panicked horror. The idea that her carefully constructed world of private cruelty could be so brazenly exposed in her own social sanctuary was something her mind could not process. This is a private family matter, she hissed, her voice a desperate, panicked whisper. You have no right. I demand you stop this instant. She lunged for my phone, her perfectly manicured nails reaching like claws. I simply took a step back out of her reach and pressed the play button. The sound that filled the opulent, silent salon was not the elegant melody of a piano, but the raw, ugly cacophony of human greed. My own voice was the first thing the audience heard, small and trembling with pain, recounting my years of sacrifice. And then came the chorus of vipers. Marcus's condescending tone as he called my life's work a PR problem. Cynthia's sharp, cutting voice suggesting I work as a housekeeper for her wealthy friends. And then the star of the show, Brenda. Her voice, shrill and full of contempt, filled the room as she called me a burden, as she offered to get me a job mopping floors, and finally, her ultimate insane crescendo. You owe me for the life you stole from me. You adopted me without my permission. A collective horrified gasp swept through the salon. Cynthia's friends, the women she had been laughing with just minutes before, took a reflexive step away from her, their faces a mixture of shock and disgust. In their world, the greatest sin was not cruelty itself, but the public display of it. The ugly, unvarnished truth of their character had been laid bare for all to see. Utterly exposed and humiliated, Cynthia let out a small, strangled cry, turned and practically fled from the salon, her friends scattering like startled birds in her wake. Her reign as a queen of Atlanta society was over, brought down not by a rival, but by the recorded echo of her own venom. The news of the incident at Chopin & Sons spread through the city like a shockwave. Brenda, realizing she had been outmaneuvered and publicly shamed in the real world, retreated to the only battlefield where she felt she had control, the internet. From the sterile, white kitchen of her mansion, she began a series of daily live streams. With a face artfully streaked with fake tears and a wardrobe of somber, humble-looking sweaters, she wove a masterful tale of woe. She titled her series, My Millionaire Mother Abandoned Me. She painted a picture of a simple, loving daughter, blindsided by a mother who had become a cruel, vindictive monster after inheriting a fortune. She cried for the camera, claiming all she wanted was to reconnect with the mother she loved, but that she was being kept away by cold-hearted lawyers. She ended every broadcast by tearfully asking for donations to her Legal Defense and Reunification Fund. And for a few days, it worked. Sympathy and money poured in from thousands of strangers who were captivated by the drama of the poor little rich girl. I watched it all with a cold, detached calm. Then I planned my response. I would not engage in a war of tears and histrionics. I would fight with the one weapon she could not counter, the truth. I hired a professional production crew and scheduled my own live stream from the sun-drenched grand salon of the Astor estate. My broadcast was titled simply, The Truth. When the camera went live, I was seated in a comfortable armchair, dressed in a simple but elegant dress. There were no tears. My voice was calm and steady. I began by telling the story of a 2-year-old girl in a metal crib and of the profound love that had compelled me to build my entire world around her. Then I presented my evidence. Beside me was a large easel. I placed on it a copy of Brenda's adoption certificate. I followed it with the closing documents from the sale of my own home and the bank statement showing the direct transfer of those funds to Brenda and Marcus. I presented copies of the checks from the ledger, detailing the thousands I had spent on her cars, her wedding, her life. Finally, with the entire world watching, I played the full, unedited audio recording of our last conversation. The internet, which had so eagerly sympathized with Brenda, now turned on her with a vengeance. My live stream went viral, reposted, and shared millions of times. The comments on Brenda's videos turned from messages of support to accusations of fraud and disgust at her breathtaking entitlement. Her donation link was flagged for fraud, and the platform, buried under an avalanche of complaints, permanently banned her channel. Her public court of appeals had found her guilty. With the truth now firmly established, I moved to the legal arena. Mr. Abernathy filed a lawsuit against Brenda for slander and defamation. Armed with the recordings of her deceitful live streams, the case was open and shut. The judge awarded me a significant financial judgment, every penny of which I publicly donated to the Samuel Stone Foundation, and, most importantly, issued a permanent restraining order. Brenda was now legally barred from coming within 500 feet of me or my property. The final move was to reclaim the house. Our lawsuit was based on fraudulent inducement and a clear pattern of emotional and financial abuse. Buried under legal fees and public disgrace, Brenda and Marcus couldn't even afford to mount a defense. The court ruled in my favor, and the title of the grand mansion on Willow Lane was legally restored to its rightful owner, me. I stood in the grand foyer where they had called me a burden, holding the new deed in my hand. The battle was over. I had won on every front. Social, public, and legal. I had my house back. I had my name back. I had my life back. But as I looked around at the cold marble and the silent, empty rooms, I felt no triumph. Victory, I was beginning to understand, was not the same thing as peace. My reckoning was complete. Now, my healing had to begin. I stood alone in the grand, echoing foyer of the mansion, the deed to the property feeling as heavy and cold as a tombstone in my hand. The battle was over. I had won. I had reclaimed the house, my name, and the truth. But as I looked at the sweeping staircase where my daughter had once descended like a princess on her wedding day, I felt no sense of triumph. The ghost of a family I thought I had, the dream I had poured my life into, haunted every silent, cavernous room. This was not a home. It was a mausoleum of a lie. My victory was not a homecoming, it was an exorcism. The very next day, I hired a team of estate liquidators. I gave them simple instructions. Remove every piece of furniture, every silk rug, every crystal glass, every trace of Brenda and Marcus's existence, and donate it all to charities that supported homeless women and children. I did not set foot in the house again. I had it professionally cleaned from top to bottom, erasing every last memory, and put it on the market. It sold within a week to a tech billionaire who was thrilled to acquire such a prestigious property. The final financial tie to my old life was severed. The last pieces of their world crumbled shortly after. Mr. Abernathy informed me that Marcus had filed for divorce from Brenda. With her family name now a source of public disgrace and her access to my fortune permanently denied, she was no longer an asset to his ambitious career. She was a liability. Their transactional marriage was terminated with the same cold efficiency as a failed business merger. Stripped of her husband, her mother, her home, and her social standing, Brenda was finally, truly on her own. Years passed. 5 of them. The sharp, agonizing edges of the betrayal softened into a dull, permanent ache, a scar on my soul that I learned to live with. The noise and fury of my reckoning with Brenda faded into a distant memory. I used a small fraction of my inheritance to buy myself a different kind of mansion. A small, light-filled cottage in a quiet arts community nestled by a serene lake, hundreds of miles from the ghosts of Atlanta. My new home had a room with floor-to-ceiling windows that bathed the space in a warm, natural light. This was my studio. Here, the artist I had kept locked away for so long was finally reborn. The scent of turpentine and oil paint once again became the perfume of my days. I painted with a fervor I hadn't felt since I was a girl, pouring all the pain, the love, the loss, and the peace onto the canvas. I found a new community, not of wealthy socialites, but of fellow artists, writers, and retired professors. They were people who were interested in my ideas, my laughter, and the way I captured the light on the water in my paintings. They valued me for who I was, not for what I had. One quiet evening, while scrolling through a local news feed online from a city far away, a video was shared in one of my art groups. The headline read, "Community Concerned for Unidentified Woman in City Park." My heart stopped. I clicked on the video. The camera was shaky, filmed from a distance. It showed a woman sitting alone on a park bench, her clothes disheveled, her hair matted. She was rocking back and forth, engaged in a frantic, one-sided conversation with the empty air around her. Her face was gaunt and weathered, but her eyes, I knew those eyes. It was Brenda. She had lost her grip on reality. A ship without an anchor, lost in a storm of her own making. I watched for a few seconds, my chest tight with a complex sorrow. There was no joy, no sense of victory, no feeling of she got what she deserved. There was only the quiet, tragic understanding that this was the inevitable end for a person built on such a hollow foundation. A life without empathy, without gratitude, without character, had simply collapsed in on itself. I closed the video. I sent an anonymous tip to a local social services agency in that city with her name and a request to check on her welfare. And then I let her go. That night, I stood in my studio putting the final touches on a new painting, a landscape of the sun rising over the lake, its light chasing away the last of the shadows. I thought about the incredible, painful journey of the last few years. I did not regret adopting that little girl in the faded yellow dress. My love for her, in its purest form, had been real. My regret was in how I had loved her. My sacrifice had not been a gift. It had been a crutch that had prevented her from ever learning to stand on her own. I had loved her so much that I had forgotten to teach her how to love back. I looked at my hands, stained with cerulean blue and cadmium yellow, and I finally understood the true nature of Mrs. Dubois' inheritance. It was not the $10 million. It was the freedom. The freedom to escape a life that was slowly killing my spirit. The freedom to say no. The freedom to reclaim my soul from the expectations of others. It was the freedom to stand here, in this beautiful, peaceful place, and finally become the woman I was always meant to be. I had learned the most important lesson of my life, that true kindness, true love, must never be practiced at the cost of your own destruction. You must first save yourself. And in the quiet, peaceful light of my new life, surrounded by my art and the gentle sounds of the lake, I finally had.